Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTGO codes, check out the Poketown store. You can even get a 5% discount on your orders using the OmniPoke code. For today's video, it's a bit of a strange one. We're going back in time to the Sun and Moon Unbroken Bonds format summary. Now, this is a little odd, I'll admit, but we're coming towards the end of Unified Minds, so I wanted to make sure that I didn't have a gap in my summary videos. So this is a video I should have done a while back, but we didn't get around to it, so we're giving it to you now. So sit back and enjoy the sort of summary of this format. It'll also be a cool thing to note because we'll be getting on to the start of Cosmic Eclipse soon, so the natural end of the Ultra Prism up to Unified Minds meta, and I'll be doing this again soon, so I just wanted to have this in here so there weren't any gaps on the channel, because I started this with Sun and Moon to Lost Thunder, and it was a series that I was hoping to continue. So let's jump into it. The tournaments that were in this format were as follows. Highlighted in red are the events that were below 100 players, so we won't be discussing them today, but there are a few extra ones in there. So Johannesburg kicked us off, then we had Sydney Regionals, Santa Clara, Sao Paulo, Singapore, Madison, Bangkok, Santiago, the Origins Open, Cape Town, John Coping was the only European one, and then there was Auckland, and of course finishing off with the NAIC, the largest tournament of the year. So before Unbroken Bonds was released, there was a Japanese tournament, but this only went up to Full Metal Wall, you can see up here. So we actually had no information on Unbroken Bonds at all. There's a few things that you can see, like Guardian being up in there. Ultra Malamar seemed to be like the strongest deck pre-Unbroken Bonds coming out for the Japanese meta, which was pretty insane. So I took a snapshot of my sort of speculation video for what the format was going to be like post-Unbroken Bonds, and sort of seeing where the hype kind of was at. This was for me at least, just for like playtesting and seeing the cards for the first time. I was pretty excited for Reshizard, Baby Blounds, and Guardian being a archetype, and then a couple others that like could have been good. I think the list was actually longer, more speculative stuff down here for sure. But yeah, let's jump into the first tournament, which was the Sydney Regionals on the 18th of May. We actually saw Zapdos Beasts take the win, so just a tried and trusted archetype. And another making top 4 and 2 in top 8. So it seems like more often than not, people just stuck to their guns, knowing that Zapdos is strong and can still like take on everything else, which is definitely reasonable. There was some concern that Baby Blacephalon would be a difficult matchup for the deck, just because they have 120 hit points and they can like out-resource Zapdoses at times, but Zapdos was just ironed out and more consistent than everything else. So it's not too shocking that it still did very well in the first weekend. Zoro Persian plus Water Techs, namely Slowking and Dugong, sometimes both, sometimes just one or the other, kind of had its first good placements. It got second place, Henry Brand piloting it. You might recognize that name as of now. And there was another Zoro deck as well in top 8. Obviously, 3CE came out in Unbroken Bonds, and also people look towards things like Dugong and Slowking to help out against the upcoming threat of Reshizard, of course, for the Zoroark players. Pikarom and Greenzard also feature in top 8 and top 4, so that's pretty decent. Greenzard finally like jumping onto the scene in his first weekend of it being around, which is pretty sick. Having a bunch of heals in there, being a very tanky archetype to deal with. Again, we saw a decent amount of like Japanese lists sort of coming onto the scene from some of their opening tournaments, and the Greenzard was just one that we could sort of take and look towards as well. Also that same weekend, we had Santa Clara Regionals. Kian Amini and Alex Szymanski really did sort of put out the stall that Reshizard is pretty broken as a card. Kian took down the event with the Greens build, and Alex had a nice build using, the sort of Turbo Zard build, I guess you could say, with Dedenes, Lele's for like Kiawe, and having like Jirachi throughout as well to keep Stellar Wishing towards pieces. So yeah, both builds being strong, which is pretty awesome. Zapdos was in top 4 both times, but ended up losing to the Greenzard, which is cool. And then we see DDG chose to play Shedinja Jimmy and Azul both got top 8, which is pretty interesting. Pikarom still made top 8, but no others, from what I could tell from Limitless data at least, no other Pikarom made day 2, which is pretty insane when you think about it. Only one Pikarom. They made it all the way up to top 8, but, you know, for such a popular deck, pre-Unbroken Bonds, that's pretty unheard of for only one to make it, which is nuts. Also, we saw Lucario Melmetal pair with Vileplume for top 8, and as well there was some top 16s as well. So that archetype obviously being really annoying for people to deal with. Lucario Melmetal, such an annoying card, probably is able to just beat out Zoroark decks on his own. And then you just build a Vileplume against, you know, the Zards, the Zapdoses, the Pikaroms and stuff like that, and it's just really rough for them to deal with. So the archetype just being a Stonewall annoying deck for so many things just seemed to be a bit of a pain, and obviously it was pre-people adding in things like Stealthy Hoods into their deck to get around Plume. So yeah, there was things like Arcanine that sort of slipped in later, or Stealthy Hoods and stuff like that, especially because you can see on the far left there was a bunch of Weezing that were sort of knocking on the door, getting some top 32 placements. That's a decent chunk of top 32 for, again, quite a new deck. So naturally, after seeing Lucario Melmetal make a top 8 and Weezing sort of being on the rise in the sort of popularity, it meant that Stealthy Hood was definitely like a more promising card going forward. Some of the other interesting decks, we see the first sighting of Baby Blacephalon in top 32, as well as a very interesting Vikavolt deck using the Charger Bugs that are essentially like double rainbow energies that you can attach straight onto your Vikavolts, which is pretty crazy. So yeah, that's a pretty cool archetype that we saw. It wasn't really replicated too much from then on, but it was definitely one that sort of turned a few heads. Again, in the same weekend, Sao Paulo Regionals, Pablo also playing the Turbo Ability Zard. His list was super streamlined. I think he played 4 Acrobikes, as well as like a really high count of Kiawe. So like he was really trying to just jam that Kiawe on one and welder his way like to victory from then on, just putting a lot of pressure on people. There was another in top 8, which is cool. Zoro seemed to be very strong and proving itself even in this meta, even keeping up with the Fire decks, mainly because they added in Slowkings, so that was the place. That was the one that got second. Also top 4. There was a top 4 for Zoro Rock as well, and a top 8 for Silvally Dugong build of Zoroark run by Gustavo. I don't think we ever saw that list. There was speculation about kind of some of the includes that were in there, whether or not it was like fighting memory or anything like that. It wasn't like totally clear what that sort of build was from Gustavo. So yeah, we didn't really see that like get replicated sort of beyond this placement, but maybe that was different if Limitless actually like had the list accessible, because that's definitely an interesting archetype that never really was repeated. Weezing made it into top 8 as well, which is pretty awesome after a few decent placements elsewhere, and there was also a bunch of other top 16 finishes, same as Zap Beasts. So yeah, those archetypes were still in and around the top and did reasonably well. The only real exciting deck from Sao Paulo was this, basically similar to the Lucario Melmetal Plume deck, but this time using Buzzmosa and like B-strings and stuff, which is pretty funky as well. Then we move on to the 1st of June in Madison. We see Ian Robb adding in some tool removal in the form of like a Field Blower and a Labs into Blacephalon to help him out. Alongside obviously Welder trying to uptrade on some of these tag teams after seeing Pikarom and Reshizard for sure becoming more popular. Just having a nice uptrade against them seems decent. DDG chose Ability Zard for the event. Zul got second. Jimmy also in top 8. So both of those guys were on a really good tear early on in the Unbroken Bonds meta. Other Ability Zards also made top 4, and a Greens made top 8. Zoro Persian Slowking also got a couple top 8 placements, with one Pikarom finding its way back into cut, and a bunch making top 16 as well. It feels like Pikarom kind of like gained its popularity again. It felt like people sort of dropped off on Pikarom for the opening weeks of Unbroken Bonds, thinking that Reshizard was just a bad matchup for it, and then slowly Pikarom sort of gained... more people sort of gained confidence in the archetype once again, and it sort of became much more relevant as sort of being able to go toe-to-toe with the archetype in general. We saw a couple crazy Grand Ball decks in top 32 and top 16, and we also saw a crazy Blissey Welder deck as well, which is pretty cool. Slapping people around with Blissey to decent placements must be a fun thing for sure. On the 8th of June, there was the Santiago Regionals. Pikarom makes a big comeback. It was able to take the win. Also, it was second place in Gustavo's hands, and also third. So the top 3 finishers all played Pikarom. Shedinja was also in top 4. That's kind of the sort of scary deck in the room. Not many people ever play Shedinja, but it can still make some placements for sure. Abilitizard, 2 slots in the top 8. Zoro 3 CE, and also a rare sighting of Malamar in the top 8 as well. Malamar really wasn't super hyped in this format for sure. It seemed like a lot of the healing from like Greenzard and stuff. Like Greenzard was such a popular deck that the amount of healing just made life awkward for Malamar. Obviously, Pikarom's not the best matchup for Malamar. So, yeah, and also Zoroark. Like, you don't actually like facing a lot of matchups as Malamar. Also, Weezing. Like, there's so many matchups Malamar actually didn't want to see in this format, so it's not super surprising that it wasn't that strong. There's also a very strange non-GX Aerodactyl Slowking deck that also made top 32, which I guess is kind of worth noting. But again, not one of the things that we really saw being replicated too much. For the 14th of June, there was the Origins Open. Danny ended up taking the win with Zapdos. Again, as you start seeing Pikarom become better, then Zapdos becomes back into a relevant deck because you have the Ultra Beast and all that shenanigans that can make life difficult for them. So that's pretty cool. Grant also had a very interesting archetype in his hands to a top 4 placement using Spiritomb, Umbreon, and Honchkrow. Basically, the worst matchup for that deck was Zapdos, but you could do pretty much very well against basically everything else, which is pretty interesting. So it took like a hard auto loss to one matchup, but then did pretty well against a bunch of other things. The Honchkrow trying to be an instant answer to Zoroark a lot of the time, and then Spiritomb and Umbreon trying to just be like efficient non-GXs that can be annoying against everything else. Pikarom got a top 4 as well as a top 8, and we also saw 2 Weezing and a Baby Blounds in top 8 as well. Baby Blacephalon was one of the sort of more hype decks in Unbroken Bonds. Didn't do too great. Like, we only saw it make that one like placement in top 32 in one of the first regionals. But Baby Blacephalon was kind of written off as being like a janky kind of deck. People tried it with greens just based on like early Japanese lists that we had seen. And that sort of disappointed. But Baby Blacephalon sort of, again, just with the amount of tag team decks around, was able to have a decent finish. And it was low-key kind of hyped for the NAIC, so something to bear in mind. Then we have the European Regional. It was Magnus Pedersen who was able to take the win with Zapdos. So that weekend, Zapdos won both tournaments, which is pretty sick. But also had a Greenzard second place finish, which is pretty decent. Greenzard was kind of less popular than Abilitizard, I would say, for the overall field, so that's definitely something to bear in mind. Sander had his latest Stalling Walling deck with a top 4 finish, and another Stalling Walling deck in top 8. There was also Reshizard, a Pikarom, and Ivanov playing Zoro Dugong, also in the top 8. So definitely something to bear in mind. Who knows if Ivanov will pop up again? Spoiler, he will. So pre-NAIC, this is the top 10 decks that I sort of laid out. Reshizard obviously having a lot of popularity with the general public. The 2 most popular archetypes going into the NAIC was either Abilitizard or Greenzard, so people were pretty hyped on that tag team. Zapdos still a pretty popular one. Pikarom being pretty well respected. Zoro as well up there, so pretty much in keeping with what my own top 10 was, to be honest. Very, very similar overall, I would say. I think the biggest sort of like nuanced deck just sort of coming out on the scene from Origins was that Spiritomb kind of dark box thing. So definitely something to bear in mind. So the biggest tournament of the year was won by Stefan, which is very impressive. He was playing Zoro Dugong, and he was able to take the win. Very cool to see him stick to his guns from the previous weekend. And get such a big result once again with a build, especially because Zoro Dugong wasn't really winning events. It was getting a decent number of like top cuts. You saw it in top 32 a lot, but it was really actually like taking the dub. It was usually one of the basic tag teams that would take the win, or Zapdos a lot of the time. But yeah, Zoro Dugong going all the way in the biggest tournament of the year is pretty sick, to be honest. Pikarom had to take second, also got a top 4. Blacephalon had a crazy run and made it all the way to top 4 as well, which is pretty nuts for an archetype that was like shunned by a bunch of people. Making a top 4 placement is nuts. The top 8 was actually pretty wild, to be honest. There was an Ultra Malamar, which made top 8, as well as Hunter Butler with a very wacky version of that Spiritomb deck that we mentioned from Origins, but this time using Stunfisk in there as an additional beat stick, which is pretty sick. There was also a Zapdos that did make it, as well as a Varplume Wall Stall in the top 8. Like I said, the top 8 was pretty wacky overall, but there was even more wacky stuff going on. The NAIC was actually a bit of a clown fiesta overall. For being so late in the format, it's wild how many decks actually did well in top 52 and top 64. You can't really distribute the creativity award to just one person because there's so much going on here. There was a few other people repping Spiritomb to decent placements. We saw Finn Lynch playing Gardevoir, which is nuts, Gardevoir GX. Another Blissey Welder deck in Drew's hands. Jitmin, always known for playing wacky stuff. He played his Nidoqueen Meganium Swampert deck, which is nuts. And we also see a very rare outing for Tool Drop in Charlie's hands. So, yeah, the NAIC was a bit of a clown fiesta at the top. It would have been a really fun tournament to sort of walk around the top tables and people just making faces of what you're seeing because, yeah, some pretty wild stuff, to be honest. So, here are the overall rankings of decks that did the best under that Sun and Moon to Unbroken Bonds meta. The best individual deck was Reshiram and Charizard tag team. Oh my god, is this the same thing? Let me see. Is this broken down into archetypes? Oh, it is, right? Okay, so this is Ability Zard doing the best, and then the Green Zards down here. Okay, so Ability Zard did super well overall. Zapdos in at second, Pikarom doing pretty good. Weezing getting a really good amount of points as an individual deck as well. Doing more than just Pikarom, which is pretty nutty, to be honest. Then we see a bunch of the Zoro decks, and we get down to Malamar pretty low down as well. So yeah, pretty powerful stuff. The Ability Zard really was a dominant archetype in this format, but Zapdos and Pika were pretty close behind, I would say, as well. In terms of grouping it all together, again, Reshizard has the lion's share. Zoroark jumps up just because there were so many different builds of Zoro. There was a handful that were still playing fighting stuff. There was stuff with just Slowking, stuff with just Persian, stuff with Dugong, stuff with Sylvalai. You know, there were so many different ways to build Zoroark. You just had him in the back. So yeah, the Zoro was pretty awesome. Obviously as well, one thing I should note about a bunch of the Zoroarks at the NAIC, they were all playing Stinger GX. I did forget to mention that, but that's a really big deal, of course. It was like a really awesome win condition against some of the tag teams out there. Pikarom's still doing pretty good, Zapdos as well, and then you see how good Wall Stall actually was. Again, similar to Zoroark, there were so many ways that people played Wall Stall. It was just like, you either played it with Plume or you didn't, or you played it with like just Hoopers and Regigigas, and then some people played it with Luke Metal. Like, so many different ways to play Wall Stall, but that was definitely a popular deck. Weezing, Mally, Spiritomb had like a late push and got a decent chunk of points, and both Blacephalons round out the top 10 as well. So pretty interesting stuff. Obviously, we've now seen the impact of Unified Minds and how that's affected things, but I'll be going into that into the next video. So hope you did enjoy this one, guys. I hope you understand as well, although it's not super relevant anymore, that I want to keep the series rolling. And if you did enjoy this series, and if you want to see more, let me know down below. What deck was your favorite in this format? Looking back, was there anything that we sort of underappreciated? Were we too harsh on Baby Blounds? Did we wait too long to unlock the Spiritomb door and see how good that deck was? Was Weezing just really overhyped and just like super overplayed, or was it more so that people had to adapt their decks with Stealthy Hoods and stuff, where we start to see it drop out of popularity after like an early spike? All those things can be discussed down below. Hope you did enjoy though. For now though, it has been Joe from OmniPoke, and I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.